Hey everyone, welcome back. Right now, there's a deadline approaching that could quietly affect paychecks, benefits, travel, and basic government services if it's missed. And a lot of people don't realize how close we are. A temporary funding rule is set to expire, and if Congress doesn't act in time, parts of the government could shut down again. One decision could keep things running, while another could delay payments or services many families rely on. And that overlap is why this matters right now. Before we go further, I'm curious, and let me know in the comments, when you hear the words government shutdown, what's the first thing you think about? Stress, confusion, frustration, or maybe just fatigue from hearing it so often? Do you think about federal workers waiting for paychecks? Do you picture national parks closing? Or maybe you're just tired of the whole cycle and wish it would stop repeating? Whatever it is, drop it in the comments because I think a lot of us are feeling the same way right now. So now let's slow this down and walk through what's actually going on. Because once you understand the mechanics, a lot of the noise starts to make more sense. And honestly, understanding the system is the first step to knowing what might happen next and how it could touch your life. Right now, Congress is supposed to pass 12 separate funding bills every year. That's what keeps different parts of the government running. Things like defense, transportation, health, Homeland security, education, energy, agriculture, and so on. Each one of these bills is designed to fund specific agencies and programs for the entire fiscal year. It's a massive undertaking, and it's supposed to be done by October 1st every year. That's the start of the federal fiscal year, but here's the reality. As of today, only 3 of those 12 bills are fully done. 3. That means 9 are still unresolved, and about half of the government doesn't have long-term funding locked in yet. Think about that for a second. We're already months into the fiscal year, and the majority of the federal budget is still operating on temporary money. That's not how the system is designed to work, but it's become the norm over the past couple of decades. Now, there has been some progress, and this part matters. A large bipartisan package, sometimes called a minibus, passed the House by an overwhelming vote. We're talking nearly everyone. Republicans and Democrats voting yes. That package covers agencies like the Interior Department, the EPA, the Justice Department, and Commerce. So that's good news. It shows that agreement is still possible, even in a tense political environment. When lawmakers want to work together, they can, and when the issues aren't tied to hot-button controversies, compromise happens more easily. But here's the catch. Even if that package clears the Senate, and it likely will, that still leaves major parts of the government unfunded, and not just minor agencies either. We're talking about some of the biggest and most sensitive departments, including Defense and Homeland Security. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These budgets are tied up with deeply emotional and political issues. Things like military readiness, border security, immigration enforcement, and national defense priorities. And this is where things get complicated and, honestly, where the risk of a shutdown really lives. Homeland Security has become the biggest flashpoint over the past few months. Protests, public anger, and a tragic shooting involving an ICE officer in Minneapolis have completely reshaped the conversation. The incident sparked nationwide debates about the role of immigration enforcement, the use of force, and the accountability structures within federal agencies. Democrats are demanding new limits and accountability measures for immigration enforcement. They want oversight, transparency, and changes to how certain operations are conducted. They're calling for reforms that would restrict certain enforcement actions and create stronger protections for immigrants. Republicans backed by President Trump's administration are pushing back hard, arguing that enforcement needs to remain strong for national security. They say that weakening enforcement would put communities at risk and undermine the rule of law. They argue that border security is a matter of public safety and that any restrictions would tie the hands of agents trying to do their jobs. The administration has made immigration enforcement a centerpiece of its policy agenda, and they're not willing to compromise on what they see as core security issues. So you end up with two sides that aren't just disagreeing on dollars, they're disagreeing on values, on authority, and on what the federal government should be allowed to do. One side sees accountability and restraint, the other sees strength and security, And when funding bills turn into moral and political battlegrounds, they become much harder to pass. It's not just about finding the right number anymore. It's about finding common ground on principles that both sides view as non-negotiable. What some lawmakers are now quietly discussing is a workaround, funding Homeland Security with another temporary measure for the rest of the year instead of a full budget. That's not ideal, but it's a way to avoid a shutdown without forcing either side to fully concede. It kicks the can down the road, essentially postponing the fight rather than resolving it. The problem is temporary fixes stack up, and the longer they last, the more fragile the system becomes. Agencies can't plan long-term. They can't make strategic investments. They can't hire effectively. And morale suffers when employees don't know if their department will be funded month to month. Now, let's zoom out for a second because context really matters here. Just weeks ago, the country came out of a 43-day government shutdown. That was the longest in U.S. history. And even if you weren't directly affected, the ripple effects were everywhere. Federal workers missed paychecks. Some services slowed down or stopped. Trust in government institutions took another hit. And people who rely on consistency, retirees, contractors, small businesses, were left wondering what would happen next. I remember reading stories during that shutdown about TSA agents working without pay, showing up to airports every day, not knowing when they'd see their next paycheck. National parks were either closed or overflowing with trash because maintenance staff weren't working. Food inspections were delayed. Court cases were postponed. Scientific research projects were put on hold. The impacts were wide and deep, touching everything from agriculture to aviation to public health. And shutdowns almost never create clear winners. That's something history shows over and over. The damage is real, but the blame gets scattered. Polls after shutdowns tend to show that voters are frustrated with everyone involved. Sure, one party might take more heat than the other, but ultimately everyone loses credibility. Public trust erodes, faith in institutions weakens, and the people caught in the middle, federal employees, contractors, everyday citizens relying on services, pay the price. And because of that, both parties usually say they don't want another one. After the 43-day shutdown, there were statements from leadership on both sides saying, "Never again." There were promises that lessons had been learned. There was acknowledgement of the damage done. The question is whether saying that is enough, because intentions don't always translate into action, especially when the pressure is on and the political calculations get complicated. Midterm elections are less than a year away. That fact alone changes how lawmakers think. Elections always cast a shadow over congressional decision-making, especially when control of the House or Senate is up for grabs. Democratic leaders have signaled that they don't want to use a shutdown as a negotiating weapon. They remember the backlash from voters. They know that shutdowns tend to hurt incumbents. They've publicly stated that they'd rather keep the government open and fight their battles through other means. Republicans, meanwhile, want to show that their policy priorities are being implemented under President Trump's second term. They want to deliver on campaign promises. They want to demonstrate strength and follow through. They want their base to see results, not just rhetoric. And that creates pressure to stand firm on certain issues, even if it means risking a shutdown. On paper, that should push everyone toward compromise. Both sides have reasons to avoid a crisis. Both sides have something to lose. But politics isn't just about incentives. It's also about emotion, timing, and pressure from the loudest voices. It's about primary challenges and safe districts and media narratives. It's about what plays well on cable news and what energizes the base. And sometimes those forces pull harder than the desire to simply keep the lights on. Here's something else that complicates things. Congressional leaders can read the room and understand the politics, but they also have to manage their own caucuses. You can have a deal ready to go, but if a vocal minority in either party decides to block it, suddenly everything falls apart. We've seen this dynamic play out before. A handful of representatives in safe districts with nothing to lose can hold up the entire process if they decide the compromise isn't pure enough or doesn't go far enough. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Congress is still passing other bills quietly in the background. For example, there's bipartisan legislation moving forward to reduce improper Social Security payments to deceased individuals. It passed the Senate unanimously and is expected to clear the House easily. That tells us something important. Lawmakers can still agree when the issue isn't tied to identity, power, or ideology. When it's just about fixing a problem that everyone acknowledges needs fixing, the system can work. There are other examples, too. Bills about veterans' benefits, infrastructure maintenance, rural broadband expansion, and cybersecurity have all moved forward with bipartisan support over the past few months. These don't make headlines. They don't generate outrage or excitement. But they represent the kind of steady, unglamorous work that government is supposed to do. And they prove that collaboration is still possible when the stakes aren't framed as existential battles. At the same time, other big issues remain stuck. Affordable Care Act subsidies have been extended by the House, but the Senate isn't ready to move without changes. Republicans want minimum premiums to reduce fraud. They argue that some people are gaming the system and that basic accountability measures would save taxpayer money. Democrats worry that even small changes could push people off coverage. They see it as the first step toward dismantling protections that millions of Americans depend on. This exact type of disagreement has triggered shutdowns in the past. When health care gets tied to funding bills, the debates get personal and the compromises get harder. So when people ask, is another shutdown coming? The honest answer is, it depends on which fight breaks first. If lawmakers can separate the most controversial issues from the basic funding bills, they might be able to keep things moving. If they can agree to temporary measures for the most contentious departments, they can buy themselves time. But if one side decides to make a stand, if someone draws a line in the sand and refuses to budge, then the dominoes start to fall. Most analysts believe Congress will probably find a way to avoid a full shutdown by the January 30th deadline. Maybe it's another temporary extension, a continuing resolution that funds the government for another month or two. Maybe it's a partial deal where some departments get full-year funding and others get extensions. Maybe it's a quiet agreement that doesn't make headlines, negotiated behind closed doors, and passed quickly to avoid drama. The political incentives lean toward avoiding a crisis. Public exhaustion is real. Voters are tired of this cycle, and lawmakers know that. Polling consistently shows that shutdowns are unpredictable, and nobody comes out looking good. The memory of the 43-day shutdown is still fresh, and with midterms approaching, nobody wants to hand their opponents an easy attack line. But here's the part that should keep your attention. Avoiding a shutdown doesn't mean the system is healthy. It just means the lights stay on for now. Temporary fixes push the problem down the road, and each time that happens, the stakes get a little higher and the margin for error gets smaller. Agencies operate in a constant state of uncertainty. Long-term planning becomes impossible. Morale suffers. Efficiency declines. And the cracks in the system widen just a bit more. So what does this actually mean for you day to day? Well, if there's a shutdown, even a partial one, federal employees could be furloughed again. That means hundreds of thousands of workers sent home without pay, not knowing when they'll return or when their next paycheck will come. These aren't abstract numbers. These are people with mortgages, car payments, student loans, and families to feed. Some benefits processing could slow down. Social Security checks would likely still go out because that's mandatory spending, but other programs might see delays. Veterans benefits, housing assistance, food assistance, all of these could be affected depending on which agencies shut down and for how long. Even if the delays are temporary, they create real hardship for people living paycheck to paycheck. Travel disruptions can happen, especially at airports. TSA agents and air traffic controllers are considered essential, which means they'd have to work without pay during a shutdown. Last time, that led to longer lines, slower security screening, and in some cases, safety concerns as workers called in sick rather than work for free. Airlines and travelers both felt the impact. Contractors and small businesses that work with the government often feel the pain first. Unlike federal employees, contractors don't get back pay when the shutdown ends. If they're not working, they're simply not getting paid. Small businesses that rely on government contracts can face cash flow problems almost immediately, and the uncertainty makes it harder for them to plan, hire, or invest. And even if you're not directly affected, the uncertainty alone can create stress and hesitation around spending and planning. When people don't know what's coming, they tend to pull back. They delay major purchases. They save a little more. They wait to see what happens, and that collective hesitation can have real economic effects. Consumer confidence matters, business confidence matters, and shutdowns, even the threat of shutdowns, can shake both. Now, if there isn't a shutdown, that's good news, but it doesn't mean the issue disappears. It means we're likely living under another short-term agreement with another deadline coming later this year. And that cycle, over time, erodes confidence, which matters for markets, for consumer behavior, and for long-term planning. Businesses can't make strategic decisions when they don't know if their government contracts will be honored. Families can't plan for the future when they don't know if their income is secure. And the constant drumbeat of crisis governance takes a psychological toll. You know, I've talked to people over the years who work for the federal government, and one thing they always say is that the hardest part isn't the missed paycheck. It's the not knowing. It's trying to plan groceries, rent, childcare, all while waiting to see if politicians reach an agreement. That uncertainty takes a real toll. And it's easy to overlook if you're not in it. One person I spoke with during the last shutdown talked about how she'd put off getting her car repaired because she didn't know when she'd be paid again. Another talked about explaining to his kids why they couldn't go out to eat or do normal activities. These are small moments, but they add up. They create stress, they create anxiety, and they make people feel powerless, like their livelihoods are just political pawns in a game they have no control over. And guess what? That uncertainty spreads. When people feel unsure, they spend less. When they spend less, businesses slow hiring. When businesses slow hiring, unemployment ticks up, and that ripple can reach far beyond Washington. Local economies near federal facilities feel it first. Restaurants lose customers. Shops see fewer sales. Service providers have clients cancel or delay. The economic impact of a shutdown isn't just about the federal budget. It's about the entire ecosystem that depends on stability and predictability. So yeah, when you hear about deadlines like January 30th, it's not just political theater. It's a real moment where decisions or delays have consequences. It's a moment where the choices made in Washington directly affect kitchen tables across the country. And it's worth paying attention to, even if you're not a political junkie, because these decisions shape the environment we all live in. Now, what I want to leave you with is this. Don't panic, but don't ignore it either. Stay informed, pay attention to official updates, follow reliable news sources that give you facts rather than just outrage, understand what's happening and why it matters. Knowledge is power, and in situations like this, being informed helps you make better decisions. And if you rely on government services or income, it's okay to think a little ahead just in case. Even small steps like keeping a buffer in your budget if you can help reduce stress. Maybe that means holding off on a big purchase for a few weeks. Maybe it means making sure you have a little extra cash on hand. Maybe it means reaching out to your mortgage company or landlord ahead of time if you're a federal employee to explain the situation. These aren't panic moves. They're just smart precautions. If you're a federal contractor or run a small business that works with the government, now might be a good time to review your cash flow and see what options you have if payments get delayed. Talk to your bank, talk to your suppliers, have a plan B ready just in case. Again, this isn't about fear. It's about preparation. It's about being ready so that if something does happen, you're not caught completely off guard. At the end of the day, another shutdown isn't guaranteed, but it's also not some far-off, impossible thing. The pieces are there. The tensions are real. And the outcome depends on whether lawmakers can move past short-term fights and actually govern. That's the part we're all watching now, quietly hoping the lights stay on, but knowing how close the switch really is. The January 30th deadline is coming. Congress has choices to make, and those choices will either keep the government running or send us back into another round of uncertainty and disruption. Let's hope they choose wisely. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.